I will never forget the way he laughed at me. My own son-in-law standing in my living room, holding the plain white envelope I had handed him with trembling hands. He opened it, glanced at the paper inside, and then he laughed. Not a nervous chuckle. Not a kind laugh. A cruel, mocking roar that filled the whole room. This? He smirked, waving the paper like it was trash. This is your big gift? I thought you said you had something special for us. My God, you really are cheap, aren't you? The words cut deeper than any knife. Everyone was there. My daughter, my son, a few close relatives. They watched in silence as he mocked me, their eyes darting back and forth, not knowing whether to defend me or stay quiet. My daughter just lowered her head. She didn't say a word. I stood there, my chest tightening. I wanted to speak, but my throat felt like it was closing. To him, it was just a piece of paper in an old envelope. To me, it was everything. A gift I had poured my heart into. A gift that carried a value far beyond his shallow imagination. He laughed again, tossing the envelope onto the table as if it were worthless. You know, with all the stories you tell about working so hard, I thought you'd at least manage something better. A watch, maybe some jewelry, but this? This is pathetic. My son shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight, but even he didn't speak. The silence in that room was suffocating, and I remember thinking, this man thinks I'm cheap. He thinks I'm small. He thinks he can humiliate me in my own house. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that inside that envelope was the deed to a house. Not just any house, but one worth over $2.3 million. He thought it was a joke, but the joke was on him, because that night, the truth would come out. And when it did, every smug smile on his face would vanish. Forever. I am not a rich man in the flashy way my son-in-law likes to present himself. I never owned expensive cars or wore branded suits. My wealth wasn't something I showed off. It was something I built slowly, quietly, through years of sacrifice. I worked 35 years at a manufacturing company, starting as a technician and retiring as a manager. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me stability. My late wife and I lived modestly, always saving for our children's future. We didn't eat out much. We didn't travel abroad, but what we had, we built brick by brick. I have 2 children, my son Daniel and my daughter Emily. They were my pride. I poured everything into their education, their comfort, their future. After their mother passed away 10 years ago, they became my only reason to keep going. Daniel is practical, grounded, much like me. He doesn't chase after appearances. He values respect. Emily, though, she's always had a softer heart. She wants to believe the best in people, even when they don't deserve it. And that is how she fell in love with Mark, my son-in-law. From the beginning, I had doubts. Mark was charming, too charming. He dressed sharp, drove a new car, spoke with an arrogance that he disguised as confidence. He bragged about his business ventures, though he never explained clearly what they were. I wanted to trust Emily's choice, but something about him unsettled me. Still, for her happiness, I kept my mouth shut. I stood at her wedding and gave a speech about love, about trust, about family. Deep down, I prayed that Mark would prove me wrong, but prayers don't always come true. And soon, the cracks began to show. At first, it was small things. Mark would make little comments, always disguised as jokes. Daniel's lucky, he'd say at the dinner table. He doesn't have to worry about impressing anyone since your dad sets the bar so low. Everyone would laugh awkwardly. Emily would nudge him and whisper, "Stop it." But he'd just smirk. Another time, when I offered to pay for groceries during a family trip, he said, "Oh, no, save your pennies. You'll need them for your retirement home." He said it with that same mocking grin. I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was being too sensitive. But the disrespect was there, like a shadow creeping into every corner. Emily changed too. She became quieter around me like she was walking on eggshells. Whenever Mark made one of his jokes, she'd glance at me with worried eyes as though silently apologizing. Daniel, on the other hand, wasn't so patient. He confronted Mark once at a barbecue in the backyard. "Enough with the cheap jokes," Daniel snapped. Mark just laughed. "Relax, man. Can't you take a joke? No wonder your old man's so uptight." I could see Daniel's fists tighten. I had to step in and change the subject before things exploded, but in that moment I knew one thing for sure. Mark didn't respect me. In fact, he didn't even see me as family. It was late. I had gone over to Emily and Mark's house for dinner. After the meal, everyone was in the living room, and I excused myself to use the bathroom. On my way back, I passed by Mark's study. The door was half open, and the light was on. On his desk, I noticed a neat stack of papers. At first, I didn't think much of it, until I saw my own name typed at the top of the first page. Curiosity gripped me. I stepped closer, my heart thudding. It looked like legal paperwork, contracts, property documents, something official. My eyes darted over the words, transfer of ownership. Beneficiary, signature required, I froze. Why would my name be on these papers? Just then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly and saw Mark standing there, a glass of wine in his hand, his smile sharp as a blade. Looking for something? He asked smoothly. I stammered, I was just passing by. He stepped forward, closing the door halfway behind him. Careful, Dad, he said, his tone dripping with false sweetness. Papers like these are complicated. You wouldn't understand. Leave the serious stuff to me. And then he leaned in closer. After all, one day all of this will be ours anyway. Don't you think it's better if I handle it now? My chest tightened. His words weren't just arrogant, they were a warning. A declaration, and in that moment I realized Mark wasn't just after my daughter's love. He was after everything I had built. After that night, I couldn't shake the unease in my chest. Mark had shown his hand, even if only for a second. He wasn't just a smug, disrespectful man. He had an agenda. The very next week, he started dropping hints more openly. We were at Sunday dinner when he leaned back in his chair and said casually, You know, Dad, it would make things so much easier if the properties were all consolidated under one name. Less paperwork, fewer complications for the future. You wouldn't want Emily and Daniel fighting over things when you're not around, right? I felt Daniel stiffen beside me. He didn't say anything, but I could feel the heat rising from him. Emily just kept her eyes on her plate. I forced a smile. Don't worry about that. Everything is already planned, Mark chuckled, shaking his head. Planned? With all due respect, old plans don't always work out. Times change. You wouldn't understand the financial side of it. That's more my area. That's when it clicked. He thought I was naive. That I'd just hand things over because he spoke with confidence, but he underestimated me. That night, Daniel pulled me aside. Dad, he said firmly, don't you dare sign anything he gives you. He's after your assets. I can see it in his eyes. I nodded slowly. I know, but I want to see how far he'll go. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about greed. It was about respect, or rather, the lack of it. It happened on a quiet Thursday evening. I had gone over to Emily and Mark's house after work. Emily said Mark had something important to discuss with me. We sat in the dining room, and Mark placed a folder on the table. His smile was practiced, like a salesman who already believed the deal was done. Dad, he began, I've been thinking about your future. Retirement, health, security. You shouldn't have to worry about anything at your age. I said nothing. I just waited. He slid the folder toward me. I talked to a financial advisor. The smartest thing to do is to transfer your properties into a joint trust. That way Emily and I can manage them properly. We'll take care of taxes, tenants, everything. You'll be free of stress. I opened the folder. Inside were the documents I had seen on his desk weeks ago. Transfer of ownership stared back at me in bold letters. Go ahead, he urged, pushing a pen across the table. All you have to do is sign. Emily sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly. She looked nervous, like she knew this wasn't right, but didn't dare speak against him. I looked at her first, then at him. And I asked calmly, Why the rush? Mark leaned back, smirking. It's not a rush. It's just common sense. Unless, of course, you'd rather deal with lawyers and taxes eating up everything. But if you trust me, I'll make sure it all stays in the family. Trust. That was the word he kept throwing at me. But it wasn't trust he wanted. It was control. I closed the folder, pushed it back toward him, and said quietly, I'll think about it. Mark's smile faltered for just a second. But then he chuckled and said, Of course. Take your time. Just don't take too long. Life's unpredictable. Those words chilled me. Daniel heard it from a mutual acquaintance at the golf club. Apparently, Mark had been drinking and boasting to his friends. Don't worry, boys, he had said, laughing. In a few months, all of the old man's properties will be under my name. The guy doesn't even know what he's doing. It's just a matter of time before I run the show. When Daniel told me, I wasn't shocked, I was furious. But more than that, I was disappointed. I had hoped, foolishly, that Mark might show at least a shred of decency, but he hadn't. Daniel wanted to confront him immediately. "Dad, we can't let him get away with this. He's treating you like you're already gone." I put a hand on his shoulder. "No, not yet. Let him think he's winning. Sometimes patience is the sharpest weapon, because by now I had made up my mind. Mark wasn't going to trick me into signing away my life's work. If anything, I would make sure that his arrogance would be his undoing, and deep inside, a plan began to form. The tension in our family became thicker with each passing month. Every dinner, every gathering was no longer about laughter or stories. It was about subtle digs, uncomfortable silences, and Mark's growing dominance over every conversation. He had a way of talking that made others feel small. If I brought up a memory from the past, he would interrupt with a smirk. "Yeah. But times are different now, Dad. Back then, people thought owning one house was a big deal. Now it's all about flipping properties, making quick returns." "You wouldn't understand." Daniel would clench his jaw. Emily would look down, fiddling with her fork. And I would smile faintly, pretending his words didn't pierce me. But they did. Mark wasn't just dismissing me. He was erasing me. In front of my own children, one Sunday after dinner, he even raised his glass and said, "To the future." A future where Emily and I carry on the family legacy and manage things properly. Everyone raised their glasses slowly, except Daniel. He muttered under his breath, "You mean steal it?" The room froze. Mark laughed too loudly, trying to cover the sting. "Relax, brother. I'm just trying to make sure we don't waste opportunities. We can't live like old people forever." But I caught the flicker in his eyes. He wasn't joking. He was dead serious. That night, Daniel pulled me aside again. His voice was low but fierce. "Dad, if you let him keep talking like this, one day you'll wake up and realize you have nothing left. He's playing a long game. And Emily, she's blind to it. He was right. I knew it. But I also knew something else. Mark's arrogance would lead him to overplay his hand. Mark invited me to lunch one afternoon. Just the two of us. He chose an expensive restaurant, the kind where the waiters wear white gloves and every plate looks like art. He poured me wine, smiled warmly, and acted like the perfect son-in-law. "Dad," he said, almost gently, "you know I care about Emily, about this family, and I want to protect what you've built. That's why I think you should consider signing over at least one property now. Just one. We'll put it under Emily's name. That way, if anything ever happens, there's no risk of probate, no legal battles. It's just safe." I set down my fork. "Safe for who?" He didn't answer directly. He just leaned back, spreading his arms like a salesman closing a deal. "For everyone. Trust me, Dad. This is how wealthy families do it." I almost laughed right then and there. He had no idea I wasn't the fool he thought I was. I had spent decades working with contracts, agreements, and audits. I knew how easily a signature could destroy a life. Still, I played along. "That's an interesting idea," I said slowly. "Why don't you draft the papers and I'll look at them?" His eyes lit up and I could almost see the greed dripping from his smile. "Perfect. I'll have it ready this week." And just like that, the trap was set. Not for me, but for him, because I had no intention of signing anything. What I wanted was to see just how far he was willing to go. It was an accident. I had gone to Emily and Mark's house unannounced one evening. Emily wasn't home yet, but I heard voices in the backyard. Mark and one of his business friends were sitting on the patio, drinking beer. I was about to step outside when I heard Mark's voice, sharp and arrogant. "Don't worry about it," he said. "By the end of the year, I'll have everything." The old man's practically begging for someone to take over. He's clueless. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him. His friend laughed. "And the son? Won't he make trouble?" Mark smirked. I could hear it in his voice. "Daniel? He's too busy trying to be righteous. He doesn't have the guts to challenge me legally. Besides, once Emily's name is on the properties, it's game over. She'll back me no matter what. She always does." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just about greed anymore, it was about betrayal. He was counting on my daughter's loyalty to blind her. He was counting on me being weak. He was counting on Daniel being silent, but he was wrong. So very wrong. I stepped back quietly, my heart pounding. I didn't want him to know I had heard. Not yet. because that was the moment I decided I needed help. And I knew exactly who to call. An old friend who understood the law better than anyone I knew. The morning after I overheard Mark's conversation, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "David," I said when he answered, my voice heavier than usual. "It's me." There was a pause, then a warm chuckle. "Well, if it isn't the stubborn old man himself." "How long has it been?" David wasn't just any lawyer. He was an old college friend, sharp, honest, and one of the few people I truly trusted. After my wife passed, we lost touch, but I knew he was still practicing law. "I need your help," I told him. My tone must have carried something, because his voice immediately grew serious. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. I told him about the jokes, the disrespect, the papers I'd seen, and finally the conversation I overheard. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. Then David spoke slowly but firmly. "He's after your estate. That much is clear. But you've got leverage he doesn't know about. If you play this right, you won't just protect your assets, you'll expose him for who he really is." I leaned forward in my chair. "What do you suggest?" David outlined a plan. We'd restructure my estate, moving properties into a trust that Mark would never know about. At the same time, we'd prepare a new will, airtight, legally sound, with clear stipulations about who would inherit what. "And one more thing," David added. "Sometimes the best way to reveal greed is to test it. You give him something that looks worthless. Let him show his true colors. Then we hit him with the truth." A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth for the first time in months. "A test, huh?" I murmured. "Yes," David said. "But it has to be done carefully. You have to act as though you trust him. Let him believe he's winning. The arrogance will be his undoing." And right then, I knew this was the path forward. Over the next several weeks, I played the role of the agreeable old man. When Mark brought up finances, I nodded thoughtfully. When he joked about taking over, I chuckled weakly, as though I accepted my own weakness. It wasn't easy. Every word he spoke made my blood boil. But David's advice echoed in my head. Patience. Let him believe he's winning. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, David and I worked quickly. We created a trust that secured my properties, making them untouchable without my explicit consent. We drafted a new will, one that gave Daniel clear authority while still providing for Emily, but with strict safeguards that kept Mark far away from control, and most importantly, we prepared the test. One night, as I sat with David in his office, I asked,
"Do you think he'll take the bait?"
David leaned back, a sly grin on his face. Greedy men always do. They can't help themselves. So we designed the perfect gift, something that looked plain, almost laughable, but carried a secret worth millions. I would hand Mark an unassuming white envelope. Inside, a simple document, the deed to a house. Not just any house, but one appraised at over $2.3 million. A property I had bought decades ago for a fraction of its worth. But the envelope itself would look unimpressive. No ribbon, no fancy wrapping. Just paper. "His reaction will tell you everything," David said. I already knew what his reaction would be. That moment came sooner than I expected. Emily invited everyone over for a family dinner. Me, Daniel, and a few relatives. Mark, of course, wanted to make it an occasion. He ordered expensive wine, bragged about his latest investment, and spent half the night reminding everyone how lucky Emily was to have him. I watched quietly, my hands resting on the plain white envelope tucked inside my jacket. When dessert was finished, I cleared my throat. "I have something for you," I said, looking directly at Mark. His eyebrows shot up, his lips curling into a grin. "For me?" I nodded and placed the envelope on the table. It looked so ordinary against the polished wood, almost pitiful compared to the extravagant gifts Mark was used to. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. "What's this?" "Just a small gift," I said softly. Emily leaned closer, curious. Daniel watched in silence, his expression tense. Mark tore it open, glanced at the paper inside, and then, just as David predicted, he burst out laughing. "This?" he said loudly, waving the document around. "This is your big gift? A piece of paper in a cheap envelope?" The room went silent. His laughter echoed off the walls. Emily's face flushed, torn between embarrassment and confusion. Mark shook his head, still chuckling. I thought you were going to surprise me with something special, but this is pathetic. I felt my chest tighten, but not from shame. No, what I felt was something else entirely. Anticipation. Because Mark had just revealed himself, not only to me, but to everyone sitting in that room. Mark's laughter rang through the room like a cruel bell, every echo a reminder of how little he respected me. He held the paper up like a cheap flyer, smirking at the relatives around the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared mockingly, "behold the mighty gift from our generous patriarch, an old sheet of paper." A few uneasy chuckles escaped from distant relatives. Most stayed silent, their eyes darting between me and Mark. Daniel clenched his fists under the table, his jaw tight. Emily sat frozen, her cheeks burning red. I stayed quiet. My silence, I knew, unsettled him more than anger ever could. Mark tossed the envelope onto the table as though it were trash. "You know, Dad, for all the talk about your hard work, I expected more. Maybe a Rolex, or a down payment on a real investment. But this is laughable." I could feel every pair of eyes on me. Some were pitying, others confused. But I stayed calm. Inside, though, my heart pounded, because I knew what was coming. I folded my hands, looked at him evenly, and said, "Mark, are you sure you want to laugh at that gift?" He raised an eyebrow, still grinning. "Why wouldn't I?" I leaned back. "Because sometimes the things you laugh at are the things you should value the most." The room grew heavier, a strange tension settling in. Even Emily looked up now, her brows furrowed in confusion, but Mark just scoffed. "Spare me the riddles. If you wanted to prove a point, you failed." He didn't know it yet, but in that very moment, he had failed himself. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The sound of the door opening turned every head. And then David walked in, calm, confident, carrying a leather briefcase. "Sorry I'm late," he said casually, as though he were arriving for a friendly dinner rather than an ambush. Mark's smirk faltered. "And who's this?" I smiled faintly. "An old friend, and my lawyer." David set his briefcase down on the table, right next to the crumpled envelope Mark had discarded. He adjusted his glasses, pulled out a stack of papers, and began laying them neatly across the table. "Mr. Mark," David said smoothly, "I believe you were just mocking a certain piece of paper. Allow me to clarify exactly what that paper is." Mark blinked, suddenly uneasy. "What are you talking about?" David picked up the deed from the envelope, held it high, and spoke clearly for everyone to hear. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is the official deed to a residential property appraised at $2.3 million, a property that now legally belongs to whoever holds this document." The room gasped. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel sat back, a small, grim smile forming on his face. Mark's smirk vanished completely. He stammered, That can't be right. It's just David cut him off." "It is right. Signed, notarized, and filed. What you dismissed as worthless is, in fact, one of the most valuable gifts you could ever receive." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's arrogance had collapsed into disbelief. His face turned pale, his eyes darting around, searching for support, but no one spoke. Emily whispered, You laughed at it." Mark tried to recover, forcing a weak chuckle. "I didn't know. How was I supposed to? But the damage was done. Everyone had seen his greed, his disrespect, and I wasn't finished yet." I looked at David and gave a small nod. He understood. "Now," David continued, pulling out another folder, "since we're talking about the family estate, it's only fair that everyone here knows the truth." Mark swallowed hard. "The truth?" David opened the folder and revealed neatly typed documents. "Yes, a new will. One that ensures the estate is divided responsibly, with clear stipulations. Daniel will act as executor. Emily is provided for, of course, but with safeguards that prevent any spouse from exerting control." Mark's face turned red. "What? That's ridiculous. You can't just," David interrupted calmly. "Oh, we can. This will is legally binding, and it was signed weeks ago." The room erupted in murmurs. Relatives whispered, some nodding approvingly, others staring at Mark in judgment. Daniel finally spoke, his voice steady. "Looks like you won't be running the show after all." Mark slammed his hand on the table. "This is insane." "You can't just cut me out like this. Emily is my wife. What's hers is mine." I rose slowly to my feet. My voice was quiet but sharp enough to slice through the noise. No, Mark. What's hers is hers, and what's mine is mine. You thought you could manipulate me, mock me, strip away everything I worked for, but respect isn't bought. It's earned, and you've earned nothing. The room went silent. All eyes were on Mark. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She looked at her husband, then at me, torn between love and loyalty. And just as I thought the night couldn't get more dramatic, I added one final line. There's one more thing. Mark, one more truth you don't know. The air froze. Mark stared at me, his face twisted with desperation. What now? The room was silent, all eyes on me. Mark's face was red with anger, Emily's pale with confusion, Daniel's calm but alert. My lawyer David stood ready, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I cleared my throat and spoke slowly, letting each word sink in. You thought this was about a single deed, Mark, but you were wrong. This was never just about a house. It was about trust and betrayal, Mark sneered. Oh, cut the theatrics. Just tell me what you're hiding. David opened the final folder in his briefcase and pulled out another document. He placed it gently on the table. This, he announced, is the hidden addendum to the will. It stipulates that if any family member or spouse attempts to manipulate, coerce, or otherwise pressure the testator for financial gain, they are immediately excluded from inheritance. Mark froze. His eyes widened as though he had been punched in the gut. What? He whispered. I leaned forward. That's right. Every smug word you've spoken. Every time you tried to push papers in front of me. Every boast you made to your friends. You disqualified yourself. I knew what you were after, and I protected this family from you. The relatives gasped. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel allowed himself a satisfied nod. Mark stumbled back, his arrogance cracking into desperation. You can't do that! I'm Emily's husband! I have rights! David shook his head calmly. Not anymore. You forfeited those rights the moment you revealed your intentions. The law and this will are clear. For the first time since I had known him, Mark was speechless. Emily's voice trembled as she looked at her husband. All this time. I thought you loved me, but you never wanted me, did you? You just wanted what my father built. Mark reached for her hand desperately. No, Emily, listen, it's not like that. I was just trying to secure our future. For us, she pulled away. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Our future? Or your fortune? The room was tense. Relatives whispered. Some shook their heads in disgust. Mark turned to me, his face twisted with anger. You did this. You poisoned her against me! I stood tall, my voice firm. No, Mark, you did this to yourself. You mocked me. You tried to manipulate me. You underestimated me. And worst of all, you disrespected the very family you wanted to control. Daniel stepped forward, his voice low but steady. Get out! Mark's eyes darted between us, searching for someone to back him up. No one moved. Even Emily, his own wife, sat silent, her tears falling onto her lap. Finally, he shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. Fine, you'll regret this. All of you! He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. The room stayed quiet for a long moment after he left. Emily sobbed softly. Daniel put a hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her. I stood there, my chest heavy, torn between sorrow for my daughter and relief that the truth was finally out. David gathered the papers calmly, tucking them back into his briefcase. He gave me a reassuring nod. It's over. You can't touch your estate. Not now, not ever. But in my heart, I knew it wasn't just about the estate. It was about the scars Mark had left on this family. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The room was quiet again, waiting. Family, I began, my voice soft but firm, is not built on money. It's built on respect, on loyalty, on love. Mark thought he could buy his place here with arrogance and manipulation. But money without respect means nothing. Daniel nodded, his eyes locked on mine. Emily looked down, her tears still falling, but I knew my words were reaching her. I continued. I worked my whole life, not so you could have riches, but so you could have security, comfort, a foundation. I didn't do it so some outsider could laugh at me and strip it all away. And now, thanks to this plan, none of that will happen. I turned to Emily then, my voice gentler. You are my daughter. I love you, but you must see people for who they are. not who you hope they'll become. She nodded weakly, whispering, I'm sorry, Dad. I placed a hand on her shoulder. Don't be sorry. Just learn. Respect matters more than money. Always, the relatives murmured in agreement. Daniel looked proud. David smiled faintly, satisfied that justice had been done. I looked around the room one last time, letting the weight of the moment settle. And now, I said quietly, he knows it too.